In 2007, BlackBerry controlled nearly half the smartphone market in America. Business executives, government officials, and even President Obama relied on BlackBerry. At its peak, the company was worth over $70 billion. By 2016, its market share had fallen to nearly zero, wiping out more than $50 billion in shareholder value. But here's what most people get wrong about BlackBerry's collapse. They think the iPhone killed BlackBerry. It didn't. BlackBerry killed itself with one catastrophic decision that seemed smart at the time, but ended up destroying the entire company. And the scary part? The exact same mistake is happening right now in industries you care about. When the first iPhone launched in January 2007, BlackBerry's co-CEO Jim Balsillie wasn't worried. In fact, he was dismissive. The iPhone had no physical keyboard, no enterprise email system, and cost $600. To BlackBerry's leadership, this looked like a toy for consumers, not a serious business tool. But what happened next reveals something critical about how dominant companies collapse. It wasn't that BlackBerry didn't see the iPhone coming. They saw it perfectly. They just chose to ignore what it meant. BlackBerry's mistake wasn't technological. It was psychological. And that single decision, choosing to defend their existing business instead of cannibalizing it, erased $50 billion in value and turned the most dominant smartphone company in the world into a cautionary tale. Let me show you exactly how this unfolded, because understanding this pattern will change how you see business competition forever. At its peak in 2009, BlackBerry wasn't just winning. They were untouchable. 50% market share in the United States. Over 80 million users worldwide. Every Fortune 500 company standardized on BlackBerry devices. Why? Because they had created something genuinely revolutionary for their time. Push email that worked instantly. A physical keyboard you could type on without looking. BlackBerry Messenger that let you communicate securely before anyone else offered encrypted messaging. And most importantly, enterprise-grade security that made IT departments comfortable giving employees mobile access to company data. Their competitive advantage seemed permanent. Companies had invested millions in BlackBerry enterprise server infrastructure. IT departments had entire teams trained on BlackBerry management. Executives were addicted to that physical keyboard. The switching costs were enormous, and BlackBerry's leadership looked at all of this and thought they had built an unassailable position. They were right about having an advantage. They were catastrophically wrong about how long it would last. Here's where it gets insane. In June 2007, 5 months after the iPhone launched, something unexpected started happening. Consumer demand for the iPhone exploded. Not among business users initially, but among regular people who wanted a device that was actually enjoyable to use. And this is where BlackBerry made their first critical error. They dismissed the consumer market as irrelevant. Jim Balsillie said publicly that the iPhone's lack of a keyboard meant it would never appeal to serious users. Mike Lazaridis, BlackBerry's other co-CEO, believed touchscreens were a gimmick that would fade. They genuinely thought physical keyboards were non-negotiable for anyone who typed more than casual messages. But they missed something fundamental. The iPhone wasn't competing on keyboards or email. It was competing on experience, apps, entertainment. A device that felt like the future instead of a business tool. And while BlackBerry focused on enterprise contracts, Apple was building something more powerful. A platform that developers wanted to build for. An ecosystem where users could customize their experience. An app store that turned the iPhone into whatever you needed it to be. BlackBerry looked at this and saw distractions. What they should have seen was the future of computing. And what comes next is where BlackBerry sealed their fate. In 2008, BlackBerry finally tried to respond to the iPhone with their own touchscreen device called the Storm. This should have been their moment to compete. Instead, it became the product that exposed their fundamental problem. The Storm was rushed to market with terrible software. The touchscreen was unresponsive. The clicking mechanism that was supposed to mimic a physical keyboard felt awkward and cheap. Reviews were brutal. Users hated it. And critically, it didn't have a real app ecosystem. While Apple had spent years building relationships with developers and creating tools that made app development straightforward, BlackBerry treated developers as an afterthought. Now here's the part that should terrify you. By 2008, the iPhone had thousands of apps, games, productivity tools, social networks, everything. BlackBerry's App Store was a desert. And this wasn't because BlackBerry couldn't build good developer tools. It's because they fundamentally didn't believe apps mattered. Their entire philosophy was built around two things: email and security. Everything else was secondary. So when developers looked at building for BlackBerry versus building for iPhone or the emerging Android platform, the choice was obvious. Why invest time in a platform where the company itself didn't prioritize your work? And here's the really devastating part. Once developers chose iOS and Android, users followed. Because the value of a smartphone isn't just the hardware or the operating system, it's the ecosystem, the apps you rely on, the integrations that make your life easier, the games you play, the services you access. BlackBerry had none of this, and the gap widened every single month. But wait, you might be thinking, didn't BlackBerry still have the enterprise market locked down? All those corporate contracts and IT infrastructure investments? This is where the story takes an even darker turn. Because in 2010, something called BYOD started gaining momentum. Bring your own device. Employees who had iPhones for personal use started demanding to use them for work too. And IT departments, which had always been BlackBerry's strongest defenders, faced a choice. Spend millions maintaining BlackBerry infrastructure for a device employees increasingly resented using, or find ways to make iPhones secure enough for enterprise use. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button now, because understanding these patterns is exactly how you avoid becoming the next cautionary tale. Drop a comment and tell me which industry you think is making BlackBerry's mistake right now. Apple and Google saw this opportunity and moved fast. They built enterprise management tools. They added security features. They made it possible for companies to support iOS and Android devices without abandoning security requirements. And suddenly, BlackBerry's last competitive moat started crumbling. The very thing they thought made them invincible, their enterprise dominance, was being undermined by consumer preference. Employees didn't want to carry two devices anymore. And when forced to choose between a BlackBerry for work and an iPhone for personal use, they chose the iPhone for both. Which brings us to the numbers that make this collapse truly staggering. In 2009, BlackBerry shipped over 50 million devices and controlled nearly 50% of the smartphone market in North America. By 2013, just 4 years later, their market share had dropped to 3%. They went from shipping 50 million devices annually to barely 13 million. Revenue collapsed. The company's market value fell from $70 billion to around $4 billion. That's $66 billion in destroyed shareholder value. And the decline didn't stop there. In 2013, BlackBerry reported a nearly $1 billion loss in a single quarter, largely from writing down unsold inventory. They had bet everything on devices nobody wanted. In 2016, they officially stopped making their own hardware and pivoted to software and licensing. The smartphone business that had made BlackBerry a household name was dead, completely dead. Now here's what makes this story so important. BlackBerry didn't fail because they were lazy or incompetent. They failed because they made a rational decision based on their current competitive advantages. Physical keyboards were their strength, so they defended keyboards. Enterprise security was their moat, so they focused on enterprise. Existing infrastructure was their lock-in, so they protected existing infrastructure. Every decision made sense if you looked at BlackBerry's position in 2007. The problem was that the market was moving to a completely different game, and BlackBerry chose to keep playing the old one. This is called the innovator's dilemma, and it's killed more dominant companies than any other force in business. When you're winning with a particular business model, pivoting to a new model means cannibalizing your own success. It means admitting your current advantages might become irrelevant. It means taking risks that could destroy the very thing making you successful today. And most leaders faced with that choice choose to double down on what's working right now. BlackBerry chose physical keyboards over touchscreens. They chose enterprise over consumers. They chose existing infrastructure over platform flexibility. And every single choice made perfect sense in isolation, but was catastrophic when combined. And here's why this matters to you right now. The pattern that killed BlackBerry is repeating in multiple industries. Cable companies choosing traditional bundles over streaming flexibility. Taxi medallion owners fighting ride-sharing instead of adapting to it. Traditional retailers protecting physical stores while e-commerce transforms shopping. Universities defending credential systems while alternative education explodes. In every case, the dominant player sees the threat, understands the threat, and chooses to protect their current model instead of rebuilding for the future. Because the brutal truth is that most of these companies will follow BlackBerry's path. Not because they're stupid, but because making the right choice requires incredible courage. It requires willingly destroying your own competitive advantages before someone else does it for you. It requires accepting short-term pain for long-term survival. And very few leaders or organizations have the guts to do that. So what's the actual lesson here? It's not just that you should embrace new technology or pay attention to consumer trends. It's deeper than that. The lesson is that your greatest strength becomes your greatest weakness the moment the game changes. BlackBerry's keyboard advantage became a liability when touchscreens won. Their enterprise focus became a weakness when consumer preference drove business decisions. Their installed infrastructure became an anchor when platforms became portable. And if you're building something right now, here's what you need to ask yourself. What are you defending that might need to die? What competitive advantage are you protecting that could become irrelevant? What moat are you investing in that might turn into a trap? Because the companies that survive platform shifts aren't the ones with the deepest moats. They're the ones willing to burn their own moats down and rebuild before someone else forces them to. BlackBerry had every advantage in 2007. Money, market share, technology, brand loyalty, enterprise contracts. They lost it all because they chose to defend advantages that were becoming obsolete. Don't make the same mistake. The biggest threat to your success isn't your competition. It's your inability to let go of what made you successful in the first place. Watch the next video here to see how another dominant company made the exact same fatal mistake. See you there.